There are quite a lot of people that do go the route of home birth here. I do know we have some good midwives, but in the area. But even in terms, like, I've heard of various different options, like people choosing to go to birthing centers or hospitals or whatever, but there's just not those options here. So it kind of feels like either you're forced to do a home birth, which can be great. My sister did one. And like you said, you had most of your kids home birth, which is a fantastic option for some people. But if you do want kind of that safety net of a little bit more medical care, even a birthing center, for example, we would have been happy to look into a birthing center option. They're not here. You'd have to go out of state again. Which honestly is just unacceptable. Like, that either you're locked into a home birth or travel.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Welcome to the American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Fromm. You know, for a lot of little girls, the dream of becoming a mom starts early. It's those sweet moments, rocking a baby doll, pushing a toy stroller, cooking up an imaginary dinner for a table full of stuffed animals. It's all pretend, until one day, it's not. Fast forward a couple of decades, and for some women, that childhood dream starts to come true. But as today's guest shares, the road to motherhood isn't always smooth. She and her husband hit a few bumps early on just trying to find the right hospital and doctor. They were specifically looking for a place with a newborn intensive care unit, or NICU, that had enough beds because they didn't want to face the nightmare of needing care and not having a spot for their baby. They finally found the right hospital, but it was an hour and a half away and in another state. And near the end of her pregnancy, when she had some complications, that drive felt like the longest trip they'd ever taken. I want to welcome Mary Grace and Ambrose Rucker to the podcast to talk about this journey, but also about what their state could do to help families not have the same story. Welcome, Mary Grace and Ambrose. First off, maybe tell us where you live and what the kind of the challenge was where you're at.
So we live in the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia. And of course, we were thrilled when we found out that we were expecting and wanted to try to find the best care that would, go along with the ideas of what we wanted in our pregnancy and our birth, to try to find the doctors and hospitals that would help us along in that journey. And it was really interesting because we were talking to various friends, people from church, and trying to find out, where did you have your baby? Where did you have your doctors? And one thing quickly became very clear, that if we wanted any sort of medical, any doctors, anything related to the pregnancy, everyone said go out of state, which was very interesting. There was a hospital that was about 20 minutes from our house, but the strange thing was we couldn't find anyone who had given birth there or received any sort of prenatal care there, which was a little bit concerning. So that is why we made the decision, like so many other of moms that we talked to seek care out of state.
Yeah, that's probably one of the most, you might think driving in traffic is stressful, but driving while you're in labor was probably pretty much. I happen to have 11 kids, so folks who listen to the show might know. Yeah, we're on the other end of that spectrum from you guys, just starting out, and but it's a blast. It's the best thing you probably ever do with your life, in my opinion. But I always disliked the end of the pregnancy because I just found it to just be stressful. Because there's uncertainty, you don't know. It's like, we got to get where we're going, and is it really coming now? All those things. So having this added on, the distance seems really almost an unnecessary anxiety producing event. So is that pretty common for couples in your area to travel that far?
Say so. Because we talked to other people, and like there was a friend who was having a home birth, and then they made the decision that they did need to transfer to the hospital. And since it wasn't like emergency, get there right now, they actually transferred to the same hospital we did. So they made the decision, even though they could have gone to hospitals closer, even ones in like Maryland, say, could have been a little bit closer, they still made the decision to drive that hour and a half to get where we were as well. So I would say, yes, fairly common.
That's interesting. You had a friend who had that experience. We had most of our kids at home, and my third child, whose birthday is today, by the way, happy birthday, Molly. She turns 21 today. So this was quite a while ago. we got on a horse and buggy and went to the hospital. But no, she during a home birth turned traverse, and it became complicated. And the doctor said, because we had a doctor who came to your home, and let's go to the hospital. The difference was our hospital is 5 minutes away.
Yeah,
it was an excellent hospital. So a very different scenario. I live in suburban Chicago, and there's a lot of options, and that was a great security to us, that I knew that if something wasn't quite right, we had easy access and close access to a hospital. So maybe go back into a little bit, towards the end of a pregnancy, because some people either haven't experienced it, haven't been pregnant. Can you share what what kind of the processes was like, and what was it like for you as you got further and further along in that third trimester?
It was interesting, actually, because I had quite a bit of morning sickness throughout the first couple of trimesters. And so actually, once I hit that third trimester, I was feeling great. I finally wasn't, so sick all the time, and was back to feeling like myself. And then, of course, at 35 weeks, then we had the appointment where they couldn't get my blood pressure down, and took the labs, discovered I had preeclampsia, and then the whole world just kind of turned upside down. So yeah, no, honestly, like it was stressful from the standpoint of, like, before we found out all this, it was stressful from the standpoint of, okay, this is getting closer and closer. But at the same time, like, I was feeling much better. So it was a shock, honestly, when we found out that, no, you are actually really sick and the baby needs to come right now, or like today. So definitely that was a shocker for sure.
Yeah. So you preeclampsia, and that's what necessitated your son being born and you having to be, and him being in the NICU. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how difficult was it as a first-time mom not to be with your son, every moment of him being outside of you and, starting his young life?
I mean, honestly, it was awful. It was something I would not wish on my worst enemy. Because just like the shock, for starters, of course, of having a routine appointment, which then turns into having the baby within, I think, about 48 hours later, was a shock, for starters, of course. And then, of course, like, I think I got to see him, they showed him to me, and then he wasn't stabilizing. I think there's the AGPAR score that I assumed that, wasn't where they needed it to be. So then they, of course, whisked him off to the NICU. And so recovering from the C-section was hard enough, but then just not having your baby there, you are so very conscious of that fact that something is not right. Like, it feels kind of like you're skipping a step. You're like, okay, I was pregnant and now I'm not. Where's my baby? And then, of course, I was pumping breast milk for him in the NICU, and that was really, really hard, of course, as well, because you're just very conscious of the fact that this is not the way that it should be. And, like, this should be my baby.
Yeah, you're hardwired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And no, it was incredibly, incredibly difficult. I think I cried just about every day during his NICU stay.
Sure.
Yeah, no, it was probably absolutely the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with in my life so far. He was in there about 3 weeks. So,
well, it's wonderful, the life-saving care that they can give now. But interestingly enough, my own story, my birth, I didn't think we'd go back that far. I happened to be a twin when I was born, and my parents didn't know that. It was like, I was, 8 weeks early, and And my twin was born though, and his lungs weren't developed enough, even though he was a little bigger than I was. So he ended up dying the day that we were born. But in today's medical environment, he probably would have lived.
Right.
And then I was in the NICU essentially for like 3 weeks or something like that. And my mom would has talked to me, as an adult, how difficult it was for her to have to go and visit her newborn son. I was the firstborn, and look through the window, maybe ask the nurses to hold me and stuff like that. And so I've heard about that kind of loss and missing, and I think it's, when I hear my mom talk about it, the way you're talking about it, it's, it's such a hard thing. And so either maybe I'm a cautionary tale or a hope that your son will turn out one way or another. So anyway, so Mary Grace, you've talked to probably other moms, whether it be in church or in your area, about pediatric medical care. What have they suggested and what do they do?
Like in terms of after the baby's born or
before or after? I mean, if, I guess the main thing is what we've identified here is that there's really a lack of options.
Right.
And there's probably, I think what we can get to talking to Ambrose too is like, how do we solve for that? How do we help a state government solve for that? But what do people do in your community when they're preparing to give birth and then even after?
Right. I do know there are quite a lot of people that do go the route of home birth here. Mm-hmm. I do know we have some good midwives, but in the area. But even in terms, I've heard of various different options, like people choosing to go to birthing centers or hospitals or whatever, but there's just not those options here. So it kind of feels like either you're forced to do a home birth, which can be great. My sister did one. And like you said, you had most of your kids home birth, which is a fantastic option for some people. Mm-hmm. But if you do want kind of that safety net of a little bit more medical care, even a birthing center, for example, we would have been happy to look into a birthing center option. They're not here. You'd have to go out of state again. Which honestly is just unacceptable. Like that either you're locked into a home birth or traveling, like whatever distance you go. As far as after the baby's born, there is a little bit more, there's a few more options for a pediatrician. We were able to find one that we liked that is about 20 minutes from our house. So the pediatricians are good. But it is really that prenatal care where we really suffer from that in this area. There's just not the options.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we've heard in other episodes that we've done, and I've heard from, working with Americans of Prosperity about almost like these OB/GYN or doctor deserts in a way. Like there's just areas whether it be due through the legal environment or just the market, there's just not options. And I think that there's a role for state government to play there in terms of trying to unleash kind of options in the market and help people overcome barriers to, want to practice there. So Ambrose, because of your personal experience here, you wrote to lawmakers in West Virginia, encouraging them to do what exactly?
Repeal certificate of need. Because that's I'm probably going to go into it more here, but it's one of the biggest things that we can do to solve a lot of these healthcare problems in West Virginia, especially.
Great. Well, what would certificate of need or CON repeal kind of entail?
Well, so basically to try to give a bit of a broad overview of what certificate of need really is that right now there's a government or state-run board that looks at anyone coming to expand healthcare service that is in the law. I think West Virginia, we have some of the most healthcare services covered by certificate of need laws than any other state in the nation. So things like physical therapy, you're a pediatrician, dentist, and especially into hospitals. And there's a laundry list of everything a hospital can provide is covered by CON here in West Virginia. So if someone wanted to expand, say, build a new hospital in an area, they would have to go to this board and go through the application process to get approved to get that bill off the ground. And it's a very, I'm not sure how it is in other states in West Virginia. It's a very tiresome, long process. There's, I believe it's an $8,000 application fee that you don't get back whether you get approved or not. You just basically toss that to the wind and it's gone. And one of the things that we're encountering is that it's very easy for pre-existing services, especially pre-existing hospitals, to go to that board when someone else is trying to apply and say, no, we have that covered. When, especially would like to use the example of prenatal care, what they're doing is they consolidate everything into like one hospital that covers a huge chunk of the state that really one hospital can't cover, but they'll come in and say, well, we already exist and we have this service that's technically within driving distance, so we don't need that expansion. And the board is predisposed to listen to the pre-existing hospital, and so then the expansion is basically shot down off the bat. And it just leads to lack of options and just lack of services availability. And basically the pre-existing hospitals and services can do whatever they please. Like, actually, one of the things I started to do when we were going and realized that the hospital didn't have NICU near us is I did some digging, and that it used to have a NICU floor several years ago, but they decided to consolidate it down to a hospital a good like 2 hours away, down in a much southern part of the Eastern Panhandle. That's still part of the Panhandle in general, but they're like, well, we have this hospital here. We'll just put all of our NICU into this one hospital for this entire Panhandle. The other hospitals now no longer have good natal care, and that existing hospital only has 12 beds in its floor. So even though the Panhandle has a good, I think 600,000 people, give or take, that's 12 beds for 600,000 people if they want to actually give birth in state. That's just one example of certificate of need laws really curbing healthcare freedom in West Virginia.
And I mean, I think what you guys are talking about is something that we try to highlight on the show a lot of times is there are real consequences to a lot of the policies that we see passed and upheld in our states. And in this case, this has really been restricting you, maybe even putting your newborn at risk because of really what I'd consider a protectionist policy. A lot of these hospitals and medical groups go and lobby these boards against a competitor expanding into their area, which seems pretty darn anti-free market to me.
Yeah.
And so because we're not allowing the market to determine what the best options are, we're taking a top-down approach where other competitors and then a state, regulators can just kind of rule whether or not there should be this kind of facility. It just seems so silly to me. I mentioned I live in Illinois, and a few years back, I actually saw there was a hospital wanting to expand build another hospital in a ex-urban place, and a competitor mounted a public campaign against it, like the way you would do a political campaign, urge the certificate of need board to deny this request. And it was just like, are you kidding me? Really? You would think that just the fact that we should be predisposed to allowing a hospital or medical group to establish something somewhere if they think it makes sense and they could, make money doing it, rather than having the government have to be the one who just decides that. Well, what, Ambrose, do you see anything in the future coming? I mean, I'm not quite sure where con repeal or that movement is going in West Virginia. And I know that you guys have a great new governor who we're so excited about, a real champion for, West Virginians, but also for more freedom and liberty. What do you think the future is there?
I think there's definitely, the future is there for healthcare freedom, but we're going to have to fight for it. And this past legislative session in West Virginia definitely showed that. Again, Governor Morrissey he is great. He is super down for just about everything to help make people's lives better you can imagine, especially con. That was one of his hallmarks of his legislative agenda. He had it the state of the state when he first took office. Unfortunately, so this past session we had a full repeal bill that we were trying to get passed, especially here, Americans for Prosperity, West Virginia. We were working very strongly on that one, trying to get people to contact their lawmakers on the committee where it has to get through before it can get voted on. Unfortunately, in the House of Delegates, the hospital associations, they lobbied as well, and they got enough lawmakers to vote against their constituents' interest to kill that bill in committee. So for this session, we could have got con repeal, but several lawmakers unfortunately folded and it got shot down. However, it's not going to stop there. Because it was such a close vote, we know that there's still opportunity for us to push this forward. And also the fact that the West Virginia State Senate, they were able to pass a con bill almost unanimously. So we already know we have a governor that will sign the bill and a state Senate that will push the bill through. So we just need to focus in on what we need to get the votes in the House of Delegates and push that one through. And one of the things that we did a lot of, and what I did a lot of, was going around and talking to people, asking people to help send letters to lawmakers, do little interviews with me about how certificate of need laws have affected them, and even going door to door in areas and just asking people like, hey, did you know that your lawmakers a chance to vote against con and expand healthcare freedom in the state? And just so many people were just saying how much they would love to see con repealed, how so many stories not unsimilar to ours where they had to drive far to give birth.
Yeah.
Or I know one family that he had to get some diabetes medication, some sort of service there, and they had to drive all the way to Morgantown, which is about 2.5 hours from where we live, and they're not too far from our house, and just to get that, because there's only that one hospital for almost the entire top half of the state that had that service available in time for him. And it's just so many stories like that of healthcare just being inaccessible to people where it really should be. And really the finger of blame is almost solely on con laws. And we definitely see that people want to see it repealed. They want to see the state government get rid of that. So we're going to try to drive that momentum forward. And I think the future is bright. We just got to make sure that people fight for it.
Yeah, well, hopefully, a show like this and other times when you're telling your story, like your personal story, that can change hearts and minds. It's unfortunate when we got like protectionist policies in place that take a real top-down approach. But we're just saying let hospitals and medical groups make up their own minds as to whether to invest somewhere. We're not saying they have to, but putting a real face and a real story with what would be really great legislative reform in the form of con repeal. I think it's an important thing, and that'll eventually carry the day. I think the hospital associations are pretty powerful special interests in most states, but when people really connect with why these kind of policies really do play a role in their lives and their family's life, then people get activated and things change, hopefully.
Yes.
Well, I hope, here's to hoping that, if your family continues to grow, that you have more options and more things that, more options for, more better options, really. So, I really do, hope that this will be a better situation for everybody in your community. So before we go, what's your son's name and how old is he at this point?
His name is Isaac, and he just turned 13 months old.
Wow.
So he is crawling all over the place. He's not quite walking yet, but I think it's going to be there soon. Getting into lots of trouble.
Yeah, that's all right. Keep him crawling or as long as they can, because there's plenty of action when they start walking. Oh, that's wonderful.
Starting to get good at pulling himself up on things. Like you put him in the crib and you think you have a minute to do something and you come back and he's looking over top of the crib now. So yeah,
he's like, what's the world out there? That's so great. I can say this as a guy who's had a lot of kids, and I just love babies too. And you guys, it's such a special time. It keeps getting cooler too, especially for the dad. I mean, the mom and the baby is really pretty magical, but it just keeps getting cooler and cooler, and it's just such a blessing. So I'm so happy for you guys and the journey that you started out on.
Yeah, I keep telling him, like, every single month, I'm like, oh, this is my favorite age. No, this is my favorite age. But we definitely want more children, and so hopefully we will have some more options.
That's great. Well, you'll probably keep saying that right up to adolescence.
Yes.
No, this is early. Well, thanks again so much. We really appreciate you joining us and telling your story.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thanks. Well, folks, it's kind of sad when you think about it that so many moms in West Virginia are looking at a state for the care they want during pregnancy, and that's just become the norm. That really shouldn't be the case here or in so many other places across this country. So hopefully one day soon, with con repeal and other reforms, that'll start to change. If you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend liberty and freedom. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.